let me just, I guess it's interesting. I want to get everyone's initial takes on where they think this is going.
I think they're going to rule in Trump's favor. I think that's kind of how the court weighs. I'm more interested right now, honestly. There seems to be some protests in front of SCOTUS, or there were this morning. They put the barricades up. There are a lot of emotions around this case. So, regardless of how this lands, we're going to hear a lot of outcry from both the right and the left. And so that's, as a journalist, what I'm going to be focusing on.
All right, Larry, what do you think?
Well, listen, the question here, of course, is whether Donald Trump can be excluded from the ballot in various states based on the 14th Amendment. And of course, 14th Amendment says that if you were an officer of the federal government and you engaged in insurrection, that precludes you from holding office. On the face of it, it is outrageous. It's despicable. You can't say that Donald Trump is guilty of insurrection against the United States when Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, hasn't even charged him, let alone tried him and convicted him of insurrection. So right there on the face of it, there's no logic to this. But even more so, I have interviewed multiple U.S. attorneys about this and constitutional scholars. The language is very clear here about being an officer of the federal government. This is an important constitutional issue. The president of the United States technically is not an officer of the federal government. He's the chief executive of the federal government. For every reason, this should not be allowed, and the Supreme Court should strike it down. But Sean, I really fear for what might happen if they don't.
If they don't what? Strike it down?
If they don't strike it down, if they let this stand and allow various states to just decide for the people of that state that they're not entitled to vote for Donald Trump because a small number of people in black robes, or in the case of Maine, one Secretary of State, one authoritarian just decided, nope, you can't vote for Donald Trump. I really fear for the future here if that's what's decided.
I totally agree with you that but there's just something inside of me that says, okay, we have a 6-3 majority of conservative justices. That would mean 2 of them peeled off to vote with the liberals in saying that the Constitution doesn't say what it says. Grace, I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Maine was brought up because that case is really interesting. It wasn't a judge. It wasn't a jury. It was just one person who decided, I don't think people should be able to vote for Donald Trump. And what's really interesting to me is when you look at the different states, it kind of actually makes me feel better about the whole thing, Sean, because in California, for example, they're saying, no, he should be on the ballot. That's California. That's pretty liberal. So there are still I talked to someone recently, a guest I had on, and they said, as conservatives, we get into this habit of saying liberal judges or this judge or that judge. There are still Democrats out there who are involved in our justice system who haven't completely lost their minds and realize that you do have to follow the Constitution and that this is very shaky legal ground. And so what I'm hoping, as you just said, I'm hoping that whatever ruling we get for this, I don't think that Trump's going to be banned from any ballots when push comes to shove. But I think what this comes down to is we need a ruling that shows the country this is not happening. Like it needs to be 8-1 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It has to be definitive, or else we're going to have all of this infighting and all of these people saying, well, the reason that it didn't go through is because of this judge or that justice or that justice. And it's just we've got to squash this before it gets out of hand.
Larry, you jumped in there. I think that Chief Justice Roberts, the people who really watch the court say that he wants to get something that's 9-0. And that may be a very narrow process point that says, one, that Congress would have to decide this, that you can't have states willy-nilly making certain decisions. But I think that that's right, that Roberts is going to look for a way to say, we need to maintain the integrity of this court and keep this country together. And we have to find a way to get to something that says 9-0.
I agree. And I pray that they do. 9-0 on the right side of this issue, on the correct side. Yeah.
But Reagan, from what I understand, there's basically, 3-4 arguments. One is the due process. Larry brought that up. He hasn't been convicted of insurrection. And frankly, he's not even convicted. He hasn't been charged with it. How do you kick somebody off a ballot without due process? That's fundamental to our judicial system here in America. That's number one. Number two, there is case law. Larry pointed this out, that the president is not an officer of the United States. So there is case law to look at that. And number three, just on its face, is this idea that that you cannot have states adding to what are the qualifications to be on or off the ballot, meaning he's 35 years old, he's born in the United States. You can't just have some state doing that. And I feel like, you talk about covering this, that this is personal. It's not law-based.
Yeah, in Colorado, the dissenting judges pointed this out, Sean, and those judges were all appointed by a Democratic governor. So, they weren't conservative, maybe libertarian, leaning more towards the left. And the dissenting judges pointed this all out and kind of called into question the integrity of courts that, rush to make a decision in this without watching the other rulings be made. And so I think that's, something that gives hope, for conservatives going into the Supreme Court ruling, that these judges that maybe lean left are even, giving scathing dissenting opinions of those who rush to persecute Trump of anything before a decision in other lower courts has been made.
Grace, one of the shows that I was listening to this morning, and I can't remember because I was flipping around, had an attorney on that was critical of one of the briefs that the Trump campaign had filed, which said that the statute actually deals with holding office, not running for office. And they were intrigued because they said that could come back to bite him, that the justices could punt and say, you're right, you can't keep him off the ballot because he's running for Congress. We will address this if he gets elected, whether he can hold office. And they were making the point that was a really dangerous argument to make. And I agree. That was, to me, like just an opening for the justices to drive down and say, okay, you know what? We're going to take this really easy path that says the statute deals with holding office, not running for office.
You know what's so amazing to me, Sean, is like I read this stuff as everybody here does every single day. And there's so many cases against Trump, and there's a new indictment every day. And then this one to try to keep him off the ballot. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but you start to get into the nitty gritty of the language of what he's being charged with, or not charged with, but why they want to keep him off the ballot. And I find myself all the time being like, which one is this? What does this one have to do with? And so you're talking about all these things like, oh, they're going to go this route or this route. And I have to say, but what are they accusing him of? They're accusing him of inciting an insurrection. And right there, for me, that's where the whole thing falls apart. It's like, did he or did he not? And I think there's plenty of evidence to show he did not incite an insurrection. He told people to march peaceably and to act peacefully. And so I don't understand how. I get that this is what happens when you get into the lawyers and the legal stuff. But for me, I'm just like, I'm sitting here and I get confused even hearing about it because it just feels like we're losing the plot. Does that make sense?
It's understandable, Grace. You know why it's confusing to hear that he's been charged with inciting an insurrection? Because there's been 1,000 people charged with crimes after January 6th, and not one of them has been charged with insurrection.
Thank you.
How does one incite an insurrection when literally no one has been charged with that crime?